I'm somebody whose life was controlled by anxiety, and I never knew it was about to change my entire world. Now, this video is not a video about me feeling sorry for myself. It's about what nobody tells you when life starts cracking under the pressure that you live with. Business, bad relationship, neglecting health, this all built up to my first anxiety attack, and I had absolutely no idea what was happening. So I grew up through my 20s pretty much trying to prove a point to the world. I had a lot of doubt, a lot of people wanting me to fail, let's say. And I got into business from an early age. So for me, it was all about trying to prove to myself that I was going to be a success and I could create this out of my own doing. And I got into this for all the right reasons. I got into this because I had a passion and a purpose and I wanted to have the business that I was currently working in at the time. But what I didn't have was a lot of guidance. What I didn't have around me was a lot of support, and I had a lot of negativity being poured into the life that I was trying to build. Now, combine this with a relationship that was pretty toxic. It was a bad combination of things that you could pour into your health over a long period of time. Let's just face it. We all pull the shutters down. We all pull the wool over our eyes. We all try to ignore what's really going on because we're trying to prove to the world that we're worthy of success. We're worthy of creating something for ourselves and that we're self-made whilst we're doing this. So from anybody looking on the outside, looking in, it would look like I had everything worked out. I had the business, I had a relationship, I was doing things in my mid-20s that you're kind of expected to do. And I think that's what the problem was, is the expectation of you being a society standard. You're trying to do the successful thing, you're trying to be self-made, you're trying to make sure that you fit in the timeline of things in life, and all of these things started to amount to something that I never knew was about to happen. It all started to fall apart at the same time. I remember my first experience with my first anxiety attack. It's actually to the point where I felt like I needed to maybe call emergency services, have some kind of shout for help, because it felt like something I'd never experienced before in my life. It was an unknown sensation. It was deep, deep, deep down inside. It's a lot like being nervous, but not being excited nervous. It was fear, it was danger, it was trying to and wanting to run from something. My first anxiety attack had me hyperventilating, blacking out, pain in my chest, palpitations, tightness. It was turning my stomach. It was a full-blown body sensation that I never knew. I'd never even experienced anything like it. How was I supposed to know what was currently going on? I actually thought at that point in time that there was something serious and quite drastic happening, and maybe there was organ failure, maybe there was a heart attack. And I was in my late 20s by this point. So I'm thinking, surely at this stage in my life, I shouldn't be any kind of like medical organ type failure problem that's happening. So what was currently going on? And I actually hadn't ever thought about mentally like what was going on in the world around me. I was just in this catastrophic lifestyle that I'd created through pressure and putting on myself to be something or do something or show the world something, that this was what was supposed to be when you're trying to be successful. And I think that was one of the biggest things I kept trying to convince myself of. And I remember this quite specifically. You're constantly trying to tell yourself that you have to endure this, you have to keep going through this, you've got to experience this because success sits on the other side of it, and this is part of that process, and this is that whole encompassing journey of what it takes to be successful. So proving to the world that I was successful was actually a huge detriment to me as a person and my own health and the life that I was currently living. See, the business that I created was something that I'd grown up in. I was in the motor trade for a while, and it was a passion, it was a love, it was something that I enjoyed, and it was something I was actually very good at. But from the outside looking in, it looked fantastic. Again, like everything, like I said previously, when you're looking from the outside and you're looking in on something, the highlight reel, let's say, it looked like everything was working well. There was state-of-the-art equipment, there was a great facility, there was top-notch work coming through. Everything was working well. But the burden that was being placed on me specifically, managing staff, managing a business, dealing with credit and accounts, dealing with customers, looking for new work, making sure processes were followed, making sure health and safety was followed. There was just a list of never-ending things that took up 15, 16, 17 hours a day, 7 days a week, that built something that I was proud of because I built it for myself. I built it from the ground up. But at the cost of what? At the cost of a lot that I didn't know, at the cost of a lot that I was yet to experience, because what I built was the catalyst, the pressure cooker of what was about to happen. And when I knew that I was going through something that was probably a little bit more me trying to convince myself that this is what was supposed to happen, I probably wish I'd have had somebody around me that had said, Andy, we need to check in on what's currently going on because this really isn't good. This really isn't going to go down a good path for you. So we need to slam the brakes on this and just reassess where it is and what's actually happening. That business was my entire identity. It was who I was, it was what I lived, it was everything I thought about. It had every ounce of my energy poured into it because I wanted to show that what I could do was going to be a success, is a success, and to prove to who. And I think that's the thing that I never realized, it was to prove to who. The business took a lot from me, and expectedly, you kind of pour everything into a business when you first get started. And I'd been in that business for over 10 years. So it took a lot, but it looked like it was moving in the right direction. But one thing I did start to notice probably over 6 or 7 years into it is I wasn't actually paying attention to myself as an individual. I can remember that I'd be ordering takeaway delivered to the workshop, working 17, 18 hours a day, not getting enough sleep, 7 days a week. The pressure, just the constant pressure of deadlines, of expectation, of high quality work, demand, all of these things just kept building and building. And there wasn't no team to spread this out over. There wasn't nobody else to kind of guide me, point me in the right directions. There was just me trying to burden this load and trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with it to create the next phase, the next success of what this business was supposed to do. And I didn't know where to turn or what to do. I didn't have access to information like we do in today's day and age. There wasn't the kind of access around to support or conversations being had. And a lot of it back then was, don't talk about how you feel, don't talk about how you think, just knuckle down, be a man, get on with it. And all of those things were just mounting pressures of not me being able to communicate what was really going on in my world. Now, the relationship, on the other hand, kind of catalyzed. It was the thing that made everything else worse, but it was also the thing that I was trying to convince myself that I needed to stay in because, again, society. Now, the relationship was running parallel to the business. It was negative, toxic. There wasn't a great environment to be in at home. So there probably was a lot of avoidance trying to take the things that I was avoiding and confronting being at home and just pouring them into the business for the hours on end. So I'd kind of created this world that was just non-stop, high pressure, high negativity. And there's a lot of fear, a lot of doubt, a lot of worry, a lot of frustrations in every environment that I find myself facing throughout every single day. There wasn't one safe space that I could go to or communicate in. There wasn't this want to be able to open up. There wasn't this need to be able to communicate with people and tell people what was actually going on. My only ability was to try and show the world basically that I was coping, that I was doing okay. But I was just faking. I was pretending. I was fake smiling my way through the day. I was telling people I'm okay. When the truth is, if you were to just look at my daily actions, I was up ridiculously early. I was back home ridiculously late. I would work 15 to 18 hours a day. I'd be non-stop. There'd be takeaway food being delivered to the workshop. There was no physical energy being poured into my own personal health. It was relentless 7 days a week on this hamster wheel, just constantly going round and round. Yes, it was, I guess it was kind of like self-fulfilling in that way, where I was convincing myself that this was what success looked like. This is what you had to give to sacrifice in yourself to build success on the other side of it. It became a very, very toxic lifestyle, a very, very toxic situation, but one that I tried to convince myself that I didn't want to share with anybody else because I didn't want anybody else having any fuel to doubt any more of what I was about to try and do with my entire life, because there was just something that I felt like I had to do growing up, that was to prove to the world that I was never going to be a failure. I was never going to be the person that didn't succeed. I had this undeniable drive to try and prove everybody wrong. And at the consequence of that, I got into a very toxic relationship. I built a business that was very, very bad for me mentally and physically, but I couldn't tell a single person what was really going on. I couldn't communicate because in that day and age, men don't talk. And it's still no different today. We're told to keep quiet. We're told to put your head down. You're supposed to endure the pain. You're supposed to endure the pressure, and you're supposed to keep pushing forwards. I'll come back to that in a second. All this built up to my body going, nope, Andy, this is not going to happen. We can't keep living, we can't keep doing, we can't keep being this particular way. So without knowing anything, my body started to reject me. And that's what it felt like. It felt like my heart was giving up. It felt like I couldn't catch a breath. My nervous system was just on 24/7. So things that would normally just be kind of a heightened alert, it was an absolute trigger. There was fear every single day. There was worry, there was doubt, there was disbelief. There was this undeniable sense of dread constantly that was just being lived in. And all of this built up to the point where my body was kind of just, it was pouring over from what it could actually contain anymore. And it got to this point where I remember the sensation of my body shutting down in my first anxiety attack was uncontrollable. I couldn't physically, and I'm somebody that is quite self-aware, and I always have been, I'm very much am now, but knowing what was happening and having no control over this, you can't control a panic attack when your anxiety is racing and your heart rate is 150, 160, 170 beats per minute, and you're hyperventilating, and you've got all of these external triggers, or these external things that are just, it's like constant loud noise that you can't switch off, and it's just compounding and compounding, and it expands and expands so quickly that you don't know what to do with it. So the first few times the anxiety kicked in, you could sense that nervousness building, and it usually started in my stomach, and it was like, well, why am I feeling this? And to get to a point where you kind of expect to know what's about to happen, but you're still trying to live with it, it was not a good situation to be in. If anything, I was not solving problems, more problems were being created because I was trying to keep contained this sense of out of control, and trying to contain that so nobody knew what it looked like, because we're not supposed to talk about it. I'm supposed to show the world that I am a success. I'm not supposed to show the world that I'm going through something or failing. These things just constantly kept building and building over a period of time where my body gave up. It completely gave up. And at the point of it giving up, I also went through losing the business and the relationship breaking down at the same time, all in the space of 2 weeks. I'm somebody who's had to figure this out myself as I've gone along. I'm no qualified therapist. I'm no qualified doctor. I'm somebody that actually has lived through this process, and now I incorporate it into day-to-day living that helps me manage my mentality, helps me keep thinking on my feet, but also in control of what's actually going on, and being self-aware enough to know that when I need to start paying attention to specific things, it's time to start paying attention to them. So what I needed to know was the physiological response. I need to know how my body was physically responding to what was going on. Fortunately, I am somebody that qualified in sports science earlier on in life, so I had a lot of understanding as to how the body and the mind worked, and what impacts kind of everything that's going on around you at that point in time. I kind of had a little bit of a step up from where most people would start. And yes, I guess that kind of helped with me trying to figure out what the logical response to this would be. But I need to know what my nervous system was doing to me. I need to know what was triggering these responses, and knowing that this was a chemical imbalance that was happening. It wasn't something that I was necessarily creating. It was more of a response to something that I had no control over. So my nervous system responding to this was just going absolutely haywire, and not knowing how to contain all of this or process any of this. That's where the problem starts to arise with people, is they don't know what to put the energy of anxiety into. So I actually went through that process for a long time in my mental health breakdown period, which was around about 2 years, where I was trying to understand what was triggering my anxiety, what was a contributing factor to this, how I'm supposed to manage this, trying different techniques, just things in my day-to-day life that were, let's just say, experimental. It was a lot of trial and feedback rather than trial and failure. I tried different things to try and help me manage the experience of when the anxiety was building. Most people will see this as a sensation towards something, that feeling that you get, and that builds on the stress threshold. Now, the stress threshold, you try saying that quick, is something that most people aren't aware of. It's your tolerance to what you're able to actually contain and stay in control of. Anxiety usually pours you well over the top of this. And the problem with that is trying to bring yourself back down into a logic perspective and trying to gain a sense of normality of what's actually going on, because you've got all of these alarms ringing because you've just entered fight or flight mode. What most people don't talk about with anxiety is the fact that what's going on mentally is there's a massive internal conversation while you're going through all of these sensations. These physical things that are happening to you, the palpitations, the racing heartbeats, quickness in breath, the nervousness, the upset stomach, the tightness in your throat, the tightness in your chest, the weakness that you feel. All of these physical sensations start to drive mental conversations that's happening whilst you're experiencing them. And people don't understand what's actually going on internally, mentally, whilst you're physically experiencing this, because you have the self-doubt conversation creep in, you have the disbelief, you have the lack of worth, the lack of value, you have all of these things that start to build on this factor that you're not in control and you feel weak, but you can't express or communicate this to anybody around you, because all that's going to do is show greater weakness. You can't succeed and you can't endure stress and pressure like everybody else. The truth is, anxiety isn't the problem. It's your response to the outcome, which is everything. So what does day-to-day management of anxiety actually look like? So for me, I'm fortunate enough to know that fitness had a huge impact on how it would control my energy, what I poured my energy into. This is something that I used to anchor everything in the sense of energy, because energy in me is kind of congruent to what anxiety really feels like. Because if I don't express energy in the form of exercise, that energy builds back into nervousness, anxiety, and something that I feel like I'm out of control with. So fitness for me has been an anchor from pretty much day one of my recovery period. If you're looking to try and gain something in the sense of control, start looking to put your energy into some movement. Maybe a gym membership, maybe a sport that you want to take on. It doesn't have to physically be exercise in itself that is fat loss or muscle building or anything like that. It's just something that you need to pour your energy into so that you get some physical and rewarding response back. You know that that energy is being used for good use. Now, the mindset work inside of all this is really about catching your thoughts before they really happen. One of my biggest triggers early on with anxiety was receiving brown envelopes through the mail. Now, you might think, such a weird type of anxiety to have about something, but let me explain where it comes from. This is where the mindset side of things comes in. To you, a brown envelope is just a brown envelope. To me, a brown envelope housed nothing but bad news, because every single piece of correspondence that I got came through brown envelopes in the mail that were bad news. Divorce, bankruptcy, debt collectors, you name it, it came through a brown envelope. So every time a brown envelope was posted through the letterbox, my anxiety triggered instantly, putting me into a panic attack, hyperventilation, that pressure on your chest, blacking out. There were so many physiological responses happening that I couldn't keep control of all of them kicking off in one go. The mindset work inside of it is to actually catch the thought, catch the process before it even happens. You know, if you hear the letterbox, is that a brown envelope? My first thing to do was to avoid it. That built on the anxiety. So what I learned to do was confront it, get to it before it even became a thought, before you even had time to try and build on what was actually going to happen. Get to the envelope, open it as quick as possible, digest what was on the piece of paper. Either or, that piece of paper was neutral, because it was going to say whatever it was going to say, good or bad. Sometimes there was money coming in, sometimes there was debt being chased. Either or, that piece of paper was neutral. It was my response to that brown envelope that was triggering everything. So your job with the mindset side of things is to actually catch yourself before you get into a state of panic and confusion, and you allow the anxiety to build before it becomes out of control. Anxiety doesn't actually go. The thing is, you start to experience anxiety on a more day-to-day basis. It becomes part of your day and you're very much more understanding of it. So I just want to kind of caveat this. You're not going to fix anxiety. You're not going to get rid of the problem. You're not going to get rid of these sensations. But what you will do is understand what's actually going on. What you will do is learn different coping mechanisms, things that work to really kind of diffuse what's currently going on. And you'll do this over a period of time. A bad day back then would be an anxiety attack that would lead to panic attacks, that would lead to greater depression, more medication. It would lead me to 2 or 3 days in bed trying to recover. It would lead to a lot of mental work that needed to be done just to regain a perspective of normality. Like, that was, for me, was huge. And then after a period of time of going through this over and over and figuring out what works and what didn't and what you can put your energy and time into, you start to understand what works best for you. There's no one way that fixes anything for one specific person. But for me, it's more about, how can I show somebody that what they are experiencing can be controlled in a way that they're able to manage what's going on. Again, through lived experiences, a bad day back then was me being written off for 3 or 4 days. A bad day now is me being aware of that I've got some anxiety going on. I've got a list of tools that, let's say, that I go to that help me specifically. I normally start to find that my anxiety builds if I don't pay attention to how I'm exercising, how I'm eating, how I'm sleeping and resting and recovering, how much time I'm spending on, say, social media, things that I might be doing that I'm not fully enjoying. I can find myself in this situation where I'm in a very negative headspace because I'm not paying attention to what my physical needs are, and I'm just trying to push myself through what's currently going on. The day-to-day now is also managed in a way where I am quite self-aware. I am quite self-aware of how I physically feel, what I currently experience, how my mental health is working. I'm very quick to respond to what is working well and what isn't working well. If it's working well, I tend to build habits around them that are day-to-day functional. I can repeat them in a behavior pattern that works very well for me, but also they are ingrained in my day-to-day living. They are non-negotiables. So for a lot of people where they pick and choose things and it's kind of, oh, I'll do this for a bit until I feel better, that's where the problem is. You're repeating cycles of high anxiety because you're not finding a system that works for you over a long period of time, that builds a lifestyle that actually allows you to create success on the back of something that you've struggled with. Anxiety doesn't have to be the thing that cripples you in day-to-day life. It can actually be the thing that pushes you forwards because you become so self-aware of what your body needs, what your mind needs, that you can re-engineer the process and work on yourself moving forwards that gives you the success in the future that you're actually really looking to create. But there's one thing you have to do. You have to be completely honest with yourself. You have to be honest with yourself when something's happening. You have to be honest with yourself when you're having intrusive thoughts. You have to be honest with the people that surround you and how you're communicating with them. And you have to be honest about the reality of the situation that you're currently in. If you're trying to live in a deluded world, you're only fueling the anxiety inside of you to keep pushing you into this disconnected way of living. And it will only build on more and more frustrations that you will create in a very, very low quality life, likely a failing business, likely failing relationships, because anxiety controls everything that you experience because you aren't in control of it. So anxiety isn't something you're going to fix. If you're watching this and you're thinking, well, I was hoping to try and find a solution towards why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling and what it is that I'm doing, you're probably white knuckling your way through life and you're in disbelief that you have to endure it. It's normal. It's not spoken about. It's taboo to speak to other people about, but also it's a weakness if I show that I'm being vulnerable because I'm talking about something. The reality is you're creating the world that you're living in right now. And unfortunately, the anxiety is part of that world that you've created. But what changes isn't the anxiety. What changes and has to change is your mindset and your physical health towards it. The thing I wish somebody had told me at the very beginning of all of this is how important it is for you to pay attention to your mental health, your physical health, your actual needs, and your identity as a person. Because you can be doing a lot of things in life that are for somebody else, for other people, to prove a point to society and the world. And especially now that we live in a day and age of social media and you're posting things around there to try and show the world that, you know, you've made your mark. But the reality is that there's only one person that all this impacts the most when you close the door and you're in your own four walls, and that's you. Those four walls see everything that nobody else does. And you have to be brutally honest with yourself that if you have created a world that you're living in that you are not happy with, there is only one place that world starts to change, and that world is within you and the decisions that you start to make moving forwards. One change today will build a better tomorrow. So be built different.